Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Hillary Dickman. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Admission for Marketing and Communications at Colorado College, and I'm also a parent of 2 college students.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good morning, friends. I'm very excited today for a lot of reasons. I believe I shared this story once before, but my oldest daughter, Karis, is 29 today. Friends, I'm telling you, the years fly by fast. But at first, Anitra had a miscarriage, and then the second child we had was born stillborn at 38 and a half weeks. So she was like, I can do this one more time, and that is it. So God is so good. So Karis is born on April 6th, and Anitra leaves the hospital on April 8th, which is her birthday. So can you imagine the birthday present after a miscarriage and a stillborn to leave with a beautiful child? So the 2 of them right now are in Canada and Tennessee for the next 2.5 weeks, visiting relatives, celebrating their birthdays. But this is my favorite season in Georgia. It's just resplendent. The weather's perfect. The birds are chirping. Yesterday, I planted a white dogwood tree and a summer red maple and a few floribunda roses and a few grandiflora roses. And almost every day, really, from 7:30 till 10:30 a.m., for the last 5 weeks, I was out there in the yard working on beautifying the grounds. It's so much fun and just so good physically and mentally. And our place is hilly at the back, so it's a real workout. I come in drenched in perspiration. You know, when I interviewed Dawn Williamson, she said in her interview that we all need to have our oxygen. And part of the oxygen for me is beautifying the grounds. That's my oxygen. Now, the icing on the cake for me this week was last night I saw 2 sensational basketball games. And you see why they call it March Madness. My condolences to you Duke fans, because that was a game for the ages. That's a sucker punch to the gut that you're probably not going to be recovering from for over a decade. But 2 incredible games. Shout out to Florida and Houston, who will play Monday night for the championship game. I am so excited. In 3 days, I hit the road for a 23-day trip visiting 12 Texas colleges. And I am exhilarated. And I just have to say thank you to all of our amazing listeners. I mean, all I did was announce on this podcast, I'm taking this Texas trip. 4 listeners reach out, 1 in San Antonio, 1 in Dallas, 1 in Austin, and 1 in Belton, Texas, and say, let's host a get-together for people I know in the area as well as YCBK listeners. And then I announced, if you have a student at any one of the 12 colleges I'm visiting who's willing to meet with me, I'd love to do that. And then my phone blows up with students that I can meet on this trip. You guys did all my visit planning for me. And there's a reason I refer to you as our listening family. This podcast thing is mystical. I mean, I literally could be in an elevator alone with a listener and I wouldn't know who you were. But there's this mystical parasocial connection all of our podcasts have with all of you. And it is really special. And I'm just humbled by your kindness, by your generosity, by your thoughtfulness. We have an idea. Let our listeners have 10 hours a month of commercial-free content, and our listeners step up and donate and cover almost all of our expenses so that you all can get the benefit of 10 hours of commercial-free podcast content every month. I'm just excited twice a week when I get to come and meet with you guys in a parasocial way. Now, if you live near Dallas, I'd love to see you. We got an event on April 13th, 4 to 6. We have an Austin event on April 17th, 6 to 7:30. We got an event in Belton, Texas, April 22nd, 6 to 7:30. And we also have our first webinar in 6 months with Jen Chow, co-founder of Polygens, Jen will be sharing the creative and cutting edge projects they provide with over 3,000 mentors at very affordable prices. That's also on April 13th, 8 Eastern, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, 5 Pacific. All of those events are on our event page. They're coming up fast. Just go to yourcollegemykid.com, sign up. If you're coming to one of the events I'm going to be at, please put your questions in. There's a place for you to put your questions in, and I'll be prioritize any questions that come in through the sign-up form, and we'll just do a live QFL session. I get stoked meeting our listeners, so if you're free, come on out. I would love to meet you on this big Texas trip. Now, in today's episode, I'm going to take one thing I learned from the SACAC conference and share how it's impacted my thinking. I also want to share a warning with you, something that I don't want to happen to you. Then I'm going to refer to a change in the SAT. It's going from 7 administrations to 8. And it may seem like a minor change, but I explain why this change has really transformed my thinking a lot when it comes to the test prep calendar. Then I'm going to do something I think you're going to enjoy. A couple of years ago, I shared the 30 hardest colleges to get into from my research, and I got really good feedback on that from you guys. So I decided to do another episode on the 75 hardest colleges to get into. We got good feedback on that. So that was 2 years ago. So today I'm going to share with you the 33 hardest public universities, according to our data, our statistics from the company I founded. And I'm going to give it to you in countdown style, just to make it a little bit more fun, add a little bit more suspense. Okay, let's start out by talking about the change to the SAT and how it's impacting my advising. So the SAT and the ACT have forever had 7 administrations. The SAT has had administrations, well, I'll give you the actual dates for this year. June 7th, 2025. So they've always had a June one. August 23rd. They've had an October one. This year it's October 4th. November 8th. December 6th. March 14, 2026. But here's the change. Now they've added a September date. September 13th is the date. That's a new administration. Now, if you heard me last week, I shared what I recommended for the test prep calendar. I said, the summer of your junior year, I love that if someone's had Algebra 2, because you have more time typically. The fall of your junior year can also work, or the spring of your junior year, whenever you really have a good 6-week block where you can put about an hour a day into test prep. And I explicitly said I do not recommend students starting their prep in the summer of the rising senior year, partly because you need that time to focus on all the writing you have to do, like the personal statement and the custom prompts, the school-specific essays, the additional info section, the new change in circumstances, 250-word essay, any honors college essay or scholarship essays. Let me be clear, that is still my best advice. But the SAT adding a September administration now does allow a student to start their prep after their AP exams after the spring. And it can work with the calendar. Now think about it. The SAT is now being offered in May, June, August, September, let alone October and November. So from May to November, the only month the SAT is not being offered is July. That's it. May to November, July, the only month you can't take the SAT. I still don't like waiting until rising senior year or June or August, but you can see a world where you could do that, because you could say, you know what, I'm going to take the first test in either May or June. And if I don't like the score I get, then I'll take it in August or September. Before, that was just, really running up on all those early action deadlines, priority deadlines. Still not my preference, because I'd rather you use that time for all the writing, and who knows what else you're doing. Could be working a lot, could be doing camps, could be busy with extracurriculars. Still not my ideal, but there's always people that wait, and now they don't have to feel as bad, or there are people that are just literally too slammed from, the previous summer all the way through the end of the spring. So for either of those reasons, I think there's another option now that for some people is going to make sense. All right. I said I want to give you a warning. You've heard me say, if you're a regular listener, please respect the competition. Please put time into building a great list of colleges, of probables and likelies. Please don't make the mistake I see students make over and over again, top-heavy lists. Julie and I had a discussion on this on episode 500. We intentionally put this on that big enchilada episode to elevate the importance of this topic and give it respect. As soon as I hit send on this episode to Nemanja, our sound engineer, so he can do his magic and improve our sound quality, I'm meeting with a senior who got shut out. He didn't get in a single school. He applied to 9 schools. He got in none. It's my first meeting with this student, but my heart goes out to anyone when I hear that this happens. And it's not as rare as you think. You know, on April 9th, I drive to Shreveport, and I'm talking to another parent of a senior at one of the most famous high schools in the country, totally shut out, in nowhere, because of a top-heavy list. By the way, not because of bad motives. Everybody wanted what's best, but just not enough knowledge of how this process works. So you want to talk about stress? You want to talk about embarrassment? You want to talk about something that puts a lingering doubt in your mind, but your own self-confidence, your own self-esteem, your own self-worth? And I'm not talking about just applying to a few schools you are likely to get into, but you have the mindset, I'll apply there to get my parents off my back. I'll apply there to get my counselor off my back, but I'm not going there. Until you've identified at least 3 colleges that you're highly likely to be admitted to, and here's the key line, you'll be happy to go to. That you'll be happy to go to. You don't have a balanced list. And you're potentially setting yourself up for a tumultuous experience. Respect the competition. Don't devalue a college just because another school has a higher admit rate than you may want. And I'm not asking for you to make these schools your aspirational schools. That wouldn't be fair for me to do that. Even if you have the mindset of these probables and likelies are my insurance policy, you need to get to the point where if you ended up going to one of these insurance schools, you can know, hey, I can have a great education. I can have a great college experience because I'm going to control my own happiness and make choices to set myself up for success. Don't assume just because a college is harder to get into that it's a better college match for you. I had from the DMV area say to me, he likes it when I go into preacher mode. Well, that's enough of a sermon for this episode, but almost everything that I share comes from lessons I learned in the counseling room. By the way, I was talking to a family I'm working with, very, very educated, Ivy League educated, actually. Good career, successful, knowledgeable. I said something about the DMV, and they said, what's that? I was really surprised. They only lived 2 hours from the DMV, but I guess they'd never heard that term in their whole life. It's DC, Maryland, Virginia, DMV. All right, let's transition to the 33 hardest public schools to get into. Now, this is very, very, very important. I don't share this list with you so you can pound your chest or you can lionize the hardest to get into schools. I share this list with you actually. Kind of the backdrop of this are these 2 conversations I'm having with seniors who got shut out. I share this with you so if you're a do-it-yourselfer and you're building your own list, you can have some balance to your list. Now, I realize by saying the 33 hardest to get in, I'm excluding a whole lot of schools, but some of the schools on this list still take students, with quite a few Bs and, as we like to say, the occasional explainable C. We used to use that term in admissions. Occasional explainable C we can be okay with. I also want to share a few caveats. What I'm going to share with you is the data that we have in the company that I founded. Perhaps others have different data, but this is what our data shows. Secondly, college major you apply to is going to matter for a lot of these schools. I'm not assuming any particular major. I'm just looking at overall across the board, which schools I see as the hardest ones to get into in the public spectrum. If you're applying to UW for comp sci, this list won't make sense. I haven't seen their 2025 data, but I saw 2024, and the acceptance rate was 2% for comp sci. UW is University of Washington. Colleges will always have their own IPs, institutional priorities, and there's no way to account for that and how that alters decisions here. I'm just speaking generally, looking at large numbers of decisions. One school might have a reciprocity agreement with a neighborhood state or an initiative to take more full pay families or something I'm going to talk with you about next Monday, the role of early decision in public schools. There's no way to account for these types of things in what I'm doing. I'm just looking at average level of difficulty I see across the range of a large number of applicants. Some high schools establish certain relationships with certain colleges, and their admit rate will be higher from those schools. I can't promise the data I'm sharing directly will apply to you and your school, but I still feel it will be helpful for you to know what our data reveals and what my experience shows. Some of these schools require test scores, and some of them are literally offended if you try to sneak your scores in. So the roles that test scores play vary significantly. And so I had to give just a bunch of those caveats just so you understand that. So I really want to make sure you take this information and use it in its proper context. Finally, I'm assuming for the sake of our conversation today that we're talking about out-of-state applicants. 32 hardest schools to get in for out-of-state applicants. That can make a big difference because getting in out-of-state is harder for some public colleges, and that isn't true for all public colleges that I'll be discussing today. All right, I'm going to give you the 32 countdown style, and then at the end, I'm going to let you know a couple schools that I saw changes from last year to this year. All right, here's the first group. Now, this group is alphabetized. This would be schools 25 to 32, but they're alphabetized. I see them all in the same tier. I really can't differentiate here. I don't have enough information to see any differences. They all feel very similar to me. Once again, the differences are going to boil down to institutional priorities of the school, whether the school accepts test scores or not, and test scores play a prominent role in what the individual applicants' test scores look like, the role of college major, things like that. And remember, I'm only talking about public colleges today. All right, so here we go. In this group, let's just call these schools. Well, first of all, before I mention these schools, I'll tell you a couple of schools that I did consider. They're not going to be in this 32, but they were all schools that I considered. UMass Amherst would be one. Penn State would be another. University of South Florida is another one, and the University of Vermont. So those are all schools that I seriously considered including. And probably the one that came the closest of those is University of South Florida. All right, so let's just call this group the competitive tier. Typically, a student here will have more A's than B's. Occasional explainable C is not a deal breaker, especially focusing on 10th, 11th, 12th. All right, in this group, we have Auburn, University of Alabama. We have Purdue in Indiana, Stony Brook in New York, University of California, Davis. It's just outside of Sacramento. University of Connecticut, flagship school for the state, that's Storrs. University of Maryland, flagship school for Maryland, College Park. University of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the University of Tennessee, that's in Knoxville. So those schools are all in that kind of 25 to 32 range for what I see from the data from our company. All right, the next group, there's 7 in this tier. So this next tier is incrementally more competitive. But I will be honest, I don't see that much of a distinction between the competitive group I just listed with you and I'm going to say is the more competitive group. They're very close. So in this group, once again, alphabetized, public schools only, Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina State, Clemson, South Carolina, Florida State, Tallahassee, Florida, North Carolina State, Raleigh, San Diego State, that's right in San Diego, Texas A&M, College Station, I'll be there on the 23rd of April, and University of Washington, Seattle, Virginia Tech, Blacksburg. So those are in that next tier, 7 schools, a notch more competitive in terms of the profiles and who I see get in, who I don't see get into that group. All right, now we're going to the very competitive group. And there's definitely a notch up in this group that I do notice. Because now we're into 17 hardest schools, public schools to get into. Once again, remember, these are alphabetized. And remember, purpose of this is not bragging rights. It's not chest pounding. It's just so that you don't have what's happened to 2 people I'm meeting with this week. Shut out everywhere, which is very unfortunate. But the good news is there's more colleges taking applications into May, June than ever. So even if you are shut out now, you still can end up at a really, really great place with a lot of great options. It's never been a better time to be shut out this year where colleges are more and more colleges are taking kids into the summer. Right. In this group, let's call them the very competitive. Once again, alphabetized. Here are the 7. Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, College of William and Mary. I was there on the 5th of December. Williamsburg, SUNY Binghamton, New York, flagship. I mean, New York's a little interesting. They don't have like one sort of flagship. You know, they really have 4 comprehensive schools: Binghamton, Albany, Stony Brook, and Buffalo would be those. University of Florida, Gainesville, University of Georgia, Athens, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I think I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're probably really surprised that I have Illinois in this tier. And I think that's mostly because a lot of the students that we see that apply to Illinois are applying to the Geese College of Business or the Granger College of Engineering. Those are just very difficult colleges to get into. And Illinois is a place that has a different admit rate for every single major. And University of Wisconsin, Madison. Those group are, I notice, are a notch more competitive to get into than that group before. Okay. Doesn't mean you won't hear of kids that get into some of these schools and didn't get into some of the previous ones. That's going to happen. But we have enough data to show that that group I just shared with you is a notch up. All right. Now we're into the 10 hardest to get into. So at number 10, UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara. Now, I went really back and forth on this because 8 and 9, I can't distinguish between UCI, University of California, Irvine, and UCSD, University of California, San Diego. Honestly, looking at just this year's data, I would put all 3 of those in the same tier. If I go back and look over 3 years of data, I would say SB feels a little easier to me than Irvine or San Diego, just in general. But if I look just at this year, Santa Barbara feels just like Irvine, feels just like San Diego, and those would be numbers 8, 9, and 10. These are schools that get over 100,000 applications. These are schools are looking to take around 80% of the students in state, mandated, pretty strict, especially for San Diego. I know the stats indicate SB is slightly easier, but this year's data, I just don't see it. They seem to me all in the same tier. And I'm not going to try to force a distinction just for some kind of dramatic effect or something. So college major does tend to play a big role in, the decisions here, but it's not the only thing. Now, when I say all 10 of these are difficult, we had a student this year who got into an Ivy League school in regular, not in ED, but in regular, who was flat out denied this year at UCSB. So that's an example to prove the point. Okay, now we're down to the final 7. And I'm going to do something I think you're going to find interesting. I'm not going to put all these in the same tier. Most of the time, I do see distinctions in these 7. Now, I will say this. These schools are clearly, to me, the 7 hardest public schools to get into. Like, to me, it's incontrovertible. It's indisputable. These are schools where straight A's and A minuses in 10th and 11th and high scores and lots of rigor is not enough. Having said that, I can think of a student I worked with this year that's going to one of these 7 that did not have that profile. So there are some exceptions, but typically you have to crush it academically, grades, test scores, rigor, and that's not enough for these schools. All right, 7th place. It's funny. I like Kenny Smith a lot. He's a graduate of the University of North Carolina. And as you guys know, there's a big rivalry between North Carolina and Duke. And so when I'm watching him, he can't hardly say Duke. He'll call the school in Durham or some other name. So I kind of feel like that. University of Michigan, especially after the brouhaha that we had this year with them when they didn't let our graduates kiss the floor, which is a tradition at Michigan State. They wanted to stay in the center court, and a shoving match, emerged, interrupted. But we kicked their butts by double-digit points. So anyway, I digress. The University of Michigan, number 7. Now, this can be a very tough admit. Last year with the company I founded, we had a student in at Harvard that didn't get in Michigan, another student in at Yale that didn't get in at Michigan. So this is a really tough admit. But we did have 9 out-of-state kids get in Michigan last year, and I do not believe 9 would have gotten into numbers 1 through 6. Some of them did apply to those. Not all 9 applied to these others, the ones I'm going to have 1 through 6. So to me, Michigan clearly comes in at number 7 in this list. But this is important. Michigan is much closer to numbers 1 through 6 than it is through 8 to 10 and those other ones I listed. All right, now 4 through 6, it would have been fun to try to differentiate them. I honestly really couldn't do that. I have to put 4 through 6 in the same tier. And those 3 are Georgia Tech, University of California at Berkeley, University of Texas, Austin. Remember, I'm doing out of state. If you forced me, I would say Georgia Tech is slightly harder than the other 2. And Texas is the school where every once in a while they admit a kid that I feel wouldn't have got into those other 7, including Michigan. But overall, it's a really tough admit out of state. They have to take 90% of kids from Texas. So Georgia Tech, Berkeley, UT Austin, or UT. All right. No more groupings. We're down to the 3 hardest. Now, I'm going to say this. I'm sharing you data from the company that I found at School Match for You. This data is different from just looking up state admit rates. I've seen that out-of-state admit rates. I've seen that data, and a lot of times it's plausible, but sometimes I just disagree with it from what I see. And there are schools that manipulate their admit rates. I mean, Northeastern is the perfect example of that on the private side. They are so much easier to get into than what their admit rate that they purport to claim, especially if you're full pay. An example on the public side is Florida State. They have a ridiculously low out-of-state admit rate, and I'm not accusing them of manipulating data. I'm just saying I don't see it. It's a competitive school to get into, but it's not like the 18% rate or whatever they produce, at least from the data I look at and the students that I see who apply. And there's other schools, like Vermont has a really high admit rate compared to, I'll see sometimes some decently strong kids that don't get into Vermont. All right, number 3, 2, 1, run, drum roll, please. Number 3, the University of Virginia. Now, according to statistics, they are easier to get into than Georgia Tech or UT Austin or Cal Berkeley. But from our data, they would be incrementally harder. Not significantly harder, but all of these schools are hard, to be really honest. These schools are really, really tough. Once you get into really any of the 10 hardest to get into, but especially the 7 hardest. Yeah, so clearly ensconced in 3rd position for me, University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Had a great visit there in December. Number 2. And this was close because this was really close to being tied for number 1. Very, very close for being tied for number 1. UCLA, right in Los Angeles. And the hardest school to get into again this year, UNC Chapel Hill. Now, having said that, it was so close, UCLA to Chapel Hill. When I was at the SACAC conference, I saw Jared. I was sitting in a workshop, and Jared was in front of me. Jared Rosenberg was in front of me. Now, he's over the UNC office. I'll be interviewing him in June, so you'll hear that interview. And at the end, I had to talk to him. I'm like, Jared, I noticed it was easier to get into UNC out of state this year. I feel I definitely saw some kids get in this year that it felt like that kid hadn't got in the last few years. So you may remember, I mentioned on the podcast before that UNC was expanding its class by 500 for multiple years in a row. I talked about it, 1.5% of the graduates of North Carolina went to UNC, and that number's down to 3.5%, and they're trying to get that number up. And one of the things I said in that podcast was what's not going to be any help for you if you're out of state, because it's almost all I believe I said it's all in state, the expansion. Well, actually, that turns out not to be true, because Jared told me that in the expansion of 500, they did also take some more out-of-state kids. I haven't been able to see what their admit rate is out of state. I know last year it was like between 6 and 7. I'm very curious what it was. I'd be curious if it hit double digits or if it's still hovering around 7, 8, and 9. Don't get me wrong. I still see kids all the time that get into multiple Ivy League schools in regular admission that don't get into like UNC and UCLA. But it was really tough. UCLA and UNC, to me, felt almost indistinguishable this year. Now, if I was sharing the toughest in-state admit, my list would actually be different. UCLA would hands down get that award as the hardest in-state school to get into. In fact, this is back-to-back years. One of our podcast co-hosts saw an in-state California kid get in Stanford, but not UCLA. Back-to-back years. In-state. And I say in-state because, there's an in-state preference. And that's not surprising to me. If I see someone get in Stanford from California, not UCLA, that's not surprising to me at all. It's very, very hard in-state admit. And if I was picking the second hardest in-state admit, it would be Virginia, especially if you're coming from Northern Virginia. And if I was picking the third hard in-state admit, I would pick Texas, and the fourth would be Georgia Tech. So in-state, UNC is like fifth, but out-of-state is still the hardest. Now, where did I see changes this year in selectivity? I already mentioned UNC got incrementally easier. Feels weird using that word. Still see how hard it is to get into. I see kids get into some of the hardest privates in the country, and then they just get denied there. But I still saw that. Virginia Tech absolutely got harder. And I should have seen that coming because when I visited there on December 9th, they told me they already had 7,000 more applications than all of last year, and they still had, 3 weeks to go before the regular decision deadline. NC State definitely got harder. And the University of Virginia in-state definitely got harder, especially coming from Nova, Northern Virginia. So those are places where I saw change. Now, let me repeat. The purpose of this is not so you can think that number 7 is a better fit for your student than number 27. The purpose is just to help you make sure that you have colleges across different levels of selectivity and not have a list that's too top-heavy, so you don't have to be like the students I'm about to talk to, one today and one by phone when I'm traveling on Wednesday. They got in nowhere. That's what I'm trying to help. All right, friends, let's transition to a very exciting interview Lisa did with the two authors of the Disengaged Teen, Jenny Anderson and Rebecca Winthrop. It's a 4-parter, so here's part 1 of 4.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, over the next 4 weeks, you're going to hear Dr. Lisa Ruff interviewing Jenny Anderson and Rebecca Winthrop on their amazing book, The Disengaged Teen. It's a 4-parter, and in part 1, Jenny Anderson shares her backstory and why she was drawn to write The Disengaged Teen. Rebecca Winthrop also gives her backstory, including her work as the director of the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution. Jenny and Rebecca share the research they did over 3 years in preparation to write the book, The Disengaged Teen, including extensive interviews and surveys they conducted. Rebecca talks about why engagement matters. Jenny and Rebecca share the 4 modes that show how students show up in their learning. They explain what coaster mode is, what achiever mode is, what resistor mode is, and what explorer mode are. They also share all of the benefits that come when a student stays in explorer mode. Lisa talks about the perfection at any cost mentality. Listen and enjoy.
Hi, this is Lisa. I am one of the co-hosts of Your College Bound Kid, and I'm very excited today to be meeting with Jenny Anderson and Rebecca Winthrop, who are the authors of a fantastic new book called The Disengaged Teen, Helping Kids Learn Better, Feel Better, and Live Better. Jenny and Rebecca, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having us.
It's great to be here.
I was wondering if you could each introduce yourselves, talk a little bit more about your background and how you came to be working on this project and writing this fantastic book. So I guess, Jenny, you're at the top of my screen. So I will start with you.
Sure. My name is Jenny Anderson. I've been a journalist for almost 25 years, which makes me very old. I covered finance for a long time, and then I switched to education, which is kind of how I came to this book, because I was working on a very well-resourced desk at the New York Times covering finance, private equity, hedge funds, global financial crisis, and then had my kids and really got interested in learning and development and education and wanted to learn more, and was really surprised at how little attention both the newspaper itself gave to the topic, but also sort of just the kind of broader conversation. about it. So I think college admissions is actually one thing we do talk a lot about, but it's sort of everything before that felt like a more limited conversation. So I started trying to shake things up a little bit and learn more about and write more about kind of the science of learning and the future of schools and what kids need to thrive. And Rebecca approached me and asked if I wanted to write a book about it. And I was reluctant at first because it felt like a really big task. I had written another book and I knew it was going to be a ton of work. But as she will tell you, or I will preface for you, she is an incredible global education expert. And I knew there was no one better I could find to try to kind of cover this weird topic of like, how do we help kids thrive in learning? That was the question we wanted to answer. And Rebecca was so good. So I turned to her.
It's true. I had to go on bended knee, Lisa, to Jenny several times. I was persistent. But the reason I really wanted to partner with her was because, I've worked on education policy, worked practitioners, have done tons of work over many jurisdictions and many years on innovating in schools and transforming systems. And I had a personal aha moment during COVID with my own two boys when I realized I did not know which one was actually deeply engaged in learning. I had misjudged them. I had one kiddo who was getting straight A's and I thought would have no problem. When COVID hit, we went learning from home on the laptop and pass fail. All grades went pass fail. What happened is he lost all motivation and told me if it doesn't get counted, it doesn't matter. And he refused to do anything. And my little one, who I thought I was going to have to spend a lot of time with, who had just been diagnosed with dyslexia, had internalized this idea that he was not capable and couldn't do it at school, blossomed. He was freed from the keeping up with his peers. And I realized it's very hard for parents to see how engaged their kids are, and wanted to write a book for families and parents and teachers and educators, but to show what good learning looks like and how they can support and how they can spot a disengaged student and learner in their own family. And I knew that storytelling had to be a big part of that. So.
No, that's fantastic. And you have the kind of background. Tell us more about your professional background that gives you the insight even into your own family.
So I run something called the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution, and I've worked for several decades on transforming education systems to make sure kids are developing the relevant competencies, mindsets, skills to thrive in today's world. And a lot of kids are not. You talk about this on your podcast. You had a recent episode around what employers are looking for and why kids don't have those skills. And a lot of them do have to do with the schooling practices. So we do research and we coach policymakers and practitioners on how to improve education and learning. And one of the things I also do, and why I was interested in a book for parents, is do quite a bit of work on family, school, community engagement, how to build better relationships around those constituencies. And I knew how essential parents are and often left out in the education reform process. And, when we bring them in, schools are 10 times better. So that's another reason why I wanted to do the book.
Fantastic. So what kind of research or, interviews or things like that did you do together to, create the idea for the book?
We did a lot of research for this book. It was a 3-year process. So key piece of it was obviously just looking at all the different literatures that address student engagement, which is engagement and motivation, and it sits in psychology and learning science and some neuroscience. And so really trying to get a sense of the sort of academic landscape. Rebecca was fantastically talented at that, and I was, wow, did I have a steep learning curve. And then we interviewed over 100 kids, a really diverse group of kids from all over the country, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different profiles. And we followed some of them for 3 years of that journey, but we checked in with a lot of them over time. And from both that work and also a massive survey we did where Brookings teamed up with Transcend, which is a really well-respected nonprofit, we surveyed over 66,000 kids and 2,000 parents to ask them about their experience of learning. And all of that sort of formed the research that and the framework which we built, which kind of identifies 4 different ways that kids turn up in the learning. I don't want to preempt your question, but that was sort of the crux of it. So it was a lot of, and on top of that, we just talked to, honestly, hundreds of teachers, educators, leaders, parents. The students themselves really, really informed our research. We tried very hard to listen to young people tell us the experience of learning today. And so that was the research. Rebecca, did I leave anything out?
You're perfect.
In so many ways.
So many ways. In so many ways, Jenny.
Why don't more people say that to me?
You are perfect in so many ways.
Can we end the conversation now? And we're done.
End of interview. We're done. Yeah. No. We're all going to have to benefit from both of your perfect knowledge of the subject.
So not perfect, but okay. Let's keep going.
Yeah, I am. So it sounds like there's really a lot of very robust research. So let's talk about what you found. And you mentioned sort of in terms of looking at engagement, there are 4 modes that you roughly define kids into. What are those 4 modes, and why does engagement matter?
Okay, let's start with the first one. Why does engagement matter? And then we'll go to the 4 modes. So in 3rd grade, 75% of kids say they love school. And by the time it gets to 10th grade, that's flipped. Only 25% of kids say they love school. And the question, do you love school, is not a perfect stand-in for how engaged kids are, but it's pretty close. Because actually how you feel about something really influences how much time you invest and how motivated you are. And how engaged a kid is basically is the determining factor on what comes out the other side in terms of learning and outcomes. And this is for any learning environment. It could be in a classroom with a teacher. It could be on the sports field with a coach. It could be at home with us parents telling our kids to pick up their dirty socks. No, nothing like a personal example there. And if they're engaged, things will come out the other side. So the more engaged they are, kids stay in school longer. We have a huge chronic absenteeism problem in our country. Kids are a lot more motivated. They invest more time. They pay more attention. Their grades are much better. They have better mental health, more pro-social behavior, less depression, less anxiety, higher graduation rates, and higher college admission rates. So it's really a very, very good thing. And so we really want kids to be engaged. So that's part A. Jenny, do you want to do part B about the 4 modes?
Yeah, I just want to maybe put a little color around what it is, because I think it took me forever to really get a handle on this. So just to help listeners, like, engagement is the sort of how kids think, feel, behave, and how proactive they are in their learning. Those are kind of the 4 components. And the 4th one is quite recent, and we can get into that. That's really this agency piece of it. But traditionally, I think we spend a lot of time thinking about sort of the grades and the cognitive piece of it. And that is a super important piece. We would never sort of undermine that. But I think a key thing we highlight in the book is that how kids, as Rebecca said, as how kids feel about learning really has a powerful influence on what they learn and how they develop an identity as a learner. And we maybe need to spend a little bit more time with that component of it. So those are sort of the components of engagement. I'll do the first 2 modes, and then I'll pass over to Rebecca. So the modes are the ways kids turn up in their learning. So it is the thoughts, behaviors, feelings, and kind of level of proactivity that they show. And the first mode is passenger mode. This is the mode that most kids identify spending the most amount of time. And about 50% of kids said that they spend a lot of time in passenger mode. And this is when they're coasting and doing the bare minimum, really not exerting any more effort than they need to. They're racing through their homework. They often like going to school because their friends are there. They may be getting good grades, or they may be getting middling grades, but these are the coasters. The second mode is achiever mode. These are the kids who are aiming for perfection at all costs. They want to sort of, if you put a hoop in front of them, they want to get through it, and they want to get through it with a gold star. And this can be incredibly positive. There's a huge number of positive things that come with this in terms of discipline, organization, goal setting. But too often these kids tilt into unhappy achiever mode. And that is really where you see a huge number of mental health problems coming up. Rebecca, do you want to do the last 2?
Yes. So then you have kids who are in resistor mode. These are the kids that drive parents teachers, school leaders, school counselors like yourself crazy. And we often dub them, we Royal We Society, the problem children. But really what we found is that they are using their voice, often inappropriately, and their behavior inappropriately often, to tell us something, that this isn't working. So they've got some gumption and they have some agency. It's just pointed away from their learning. So these are the kids who are avoiding and disrupting their learning. They're the class clown, or they're skipping school, or they're not doing homework, or they're being more disruptive. But frequently, if you give them more autonomy, more space, more enriched extracurricular opportunities, which often are taken away from them, they can hop pretty quickly to explore mode, which is the last mode, which is where we would really like kids to spend a lot of their time, not 100% of their time, but explore mode is where kids really love learning. They're highly motivated. And that is what engagement is about. It's about being highly motivated and translating that motivation into action. And they are marrying curiosity with drive. They become unstoppable. And we know from 2 decades of research that when kids have the opportunity to be in explore mode, they are getting better grades. Their mental health is better. And we certainly argue, and I think it's hard to contest this, they're developing the skills they need for a world of AI. Because in a world of generative AI, where so much is done for us, kids really need to have that agency and be proactive around using tools and wayfinding their way around the knowledge landscape that they will go into.
Yeah. Well, and I definitely want to get, excuse me, to AI, because that's, a huge game changer. But you mentioned you've got your happy achievers, right? And then you have your unhappy achievers, who are trying to achieve so hard that the perfectionism or the anxiety or the burnout is causing them to have mental health problems. And I think it's hard for families because they live in these systems, right? And the systems are kind of, at this point, I would say, the high school, if you're looking to get into a highly rejected college, it's perfection at any cost,
Yep.
right? Perfection at any cost.
Yep.
And that is sort of what the system is pushing for. So, how can parents recognize the unhappy achievers, and what can we do to help turn that around for our children?
I think you just nailed it. I think these are the kids who are aiming for perfection and not excellence. And so every misstep feels devastating. And there is a real fragility associated with this, which I think parents will kind of know and feel in their bones when they see it. They do not like to take any risks, either on behalf of their learning or with their timetable or with their sports. So it's not what do I want to do and how do I want to spend my time? It's what do I have to do and how do I do it at sort of maximum capacity? I think the things that parents can do is to recognize it. I think that's the first thing. And to recognize that if you don't take action, no one will. You are the only buffer between, in many cases, I don't want to, many times teachers will do that, but, everyone in the school community is really geared towards the best outcome possible for the child and perhaps for the institution, depending on the kind of school they're in. And so you have to be that buffer. You have to recognize that this at all costs approach could very potentially have a bad outcome for your kid. And so that's your reason. And it can feel counterintuitive because you want to ensure success for your kids, but it is at what cost and what is the message we are sending to this kid who, by the way, will carry these messages throughout life, right? So it is 100% helping them take their foot off the accelerator. I do this personally. I have one child who spends quite a bit of time in this mode. I am constantly, let's watch a TV show together. I know you have a little bit more homework, but you seem really tired and frazzled. And my guess is there's like a diminishing rate of returns here. And I think you just need to, so I literally did this last night, really tired. I'm going to do some homework. Do you know what? I think you're too tired. Like, let's just watch some TV, and it's really enforcing sleep. She would stay up until midnight every night, studying. I start arguing with her at about 10 p.m. every single night to go to sleep. It is a bit of a battle. I've finally learned that part of what's happening is that is her downtime, is by the time I convince her to go to bed and she goes to bed, there's like another hour of like faffing, but I think that is sort of her downtime. But anyways, all to say, I think the sleep is very important. And I really think we can encourage small risks. These are not kids that are going to take big risks, right? They are not going to, drop the sport that they're on the travel select team for or whatever. but you can encourage small risks. So again, in my daughter's instance, she was considering a course load. She wanted to take sort of, in the system that we're in, 10 very, very rigorous subjects. And I said, how about 9? And on that 10th, let's take an easy one. And it was counter to everything she believed, but I held firm. And I realized that might diminish her chances a little bit, but it also increases her chances of getting through intact. And that is, I do not want the system to break her. So I am being the guardian between her and the system, recognizing, and by the way, her sister needs something completely different. So that's, you know what I mean? I think that's, so the unhappy achiever, it's the fragility is really what you're seeing. And you are just helping them at all cost to develop that self-awareness of when it's getting too much, of the narrative of I must always succeed, and really conveying the importance of sort of balance, self-care, community, be with your friends, be with your family, have a conversation with your grandmother, do something that is not about an outcome. Do something that's like really kind of restorative.
Friends, this concludes part 1 of Lisa's 4-part interview with Jenny Anderson and Rebecca Winthrop, authors of The Disengaged Teen. Hope you join us next week for part 2 of 4. On Thursday's episode, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, will continue his conversation with me about how the financial pressures colleges are facing is impacting admissions decisions. Several of you sent in a QFL, a speak pipe question from a listener directed to Hillary, asking her to go into more depth about how Colorado College does not admit students who applied for financial aid, but then didn't submit the CSS profile. So Hillary is back to answer all of those questions our listeners sent in. We have a brand new interview I think you're going to enjoy. It's actually our first ever debate. I debate David Blowbaum, the co-founder of Summit Test Prep and a frequent speaker on the value of test scores. We debate whether colleges should return to mandatory test scores, ACT and SAT. And you get a brand new second interview for College Spotlight. I interviewed Jim Bach, the Vice President and Dean of Admissions at Swarthmore College, and we're talking about all things Swarthmore College in our College Spotlight over the next few weeks. And friends, I close you out with a quote. One of those quotes that I put in my book, because when I see a quote I like a lot, I can't help but put it in my book. And so this one actually has to do with more of the subjective component of college admissions. And this is from Christopher LaBounty, who was a former admission officer at MIT. And here's what he says. Personality is something people think is not a factor, but it is really hard in these environments for an admission officer, because remember, they are people, and this is a selective process, to give an offer to someone they don't like. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.